Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. We try our best to keep up with current events and current news and make comments and see what we can learn from observations and give an opinion. But today the news is occurring just rapidly right now. The hearings are going on in the Senate.
As we speak.
Yes, and we wondering what's going to happen to Comey and what's going to happen to Trump. But this is big news as far as TV goes and the people's attention. People think this is one of the biggest events ever. I don't quite agree with this because there was another thing that happened just within a few hours ago that probably deserved at least an observation, and that there was an attempted bombing at the embassy in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we have those events, and of course, if you wanted to look for some serious problems, all we have to do is go back to the Middle East. But, in a way, I don't know, this might be just stretching it a bit, but the fact that they can make this the biggest issue of the day, and it doesn't involve, it's politics, but it doesn't involve hundreds of thousands of people getting killed, dropping more bombs, starting another war, the troops moving across Europe, World War I, World War II, and this sort of thing. It's terrible, the foreign policy. But still, if this is the biggest news, maybe we figure, well, they're doing a good job of hiding and denying that there's much of a problem in the Middle East. But in the meantime, that's the big issue. People want to know what's going on. And our title suggests, there's a big difference between seeking truth and it's all about politics. I'm voting on the position that this is 95% or more, it's all about politics. It's not for seeking truth and justice, and that's what we want to talk about today because there's much involved. We have a president that is controversial, but he's been accused of some things, his relationships with Russia, and some people can call this Russiagate, and Flynn is involved in this, and he probably opened up the door for that, and Trump opens up the door for his criticism. But when the bottom line comes, I think that there's some sinister forces behind all this, and I think one of those sinister forces is the deep state that would like to undermine this administration, and I think they're doing a pretty good job, and I think it's caused Trump to be sort of flip-flopping on Russia. We don't know exactly where he stands. We were encouraged that he wanted a more sensible approach, and he decided that he had to go with NATO and the neocons, and now there's a little bit of hint, well, maybe they don't want to do that. So those kind of things are very important. So if there is a group in the deep state that say, we can't manage this guy, he won't listen, he actually thinks for himself, and he speaks out more often, we can't handle the situation, so we have to undermine him and his credibility. And I think that is generally what's going on, but nevertheless, a lot of politics involved, and Comey is in the center of this, and the more I read about him, and you've studied him pretty well, the more controversial he is. And the big question is, one legal question and a political question, was Trump smart? Did he do the right thing in getting rid of Comey? I have no objection to it, since I don't have much respect for the FBI or the CIA anyway. And so that's really the big political question: is did Trump dig a bigger hole for himself for this, or was he completely justified in getting rid of Comey, and people shouldn't be bugging him about it?
Yeah. We're in kind of a unique position because nobody can accuse you of being an apologist for Trump. You've been very critical from the beginning, so we've tried to observe objectively and to comment where we can on whether, he's done something right or wrong from our perspective. It seems to me this whole hearing today boils down to sort of three things. And I think they're so much open for interpretation. Some of them have been resolved. The first one, I hope you will let it go. That's the Flynn investigation. Apparently during a private dinner between President Trump, or I guess President-elect Trump at the time, or maybe it was President Trump at the time, and Comey, he said, I hope you'll see your way as to letting this Flynn thing go. The question is, was that a command or was it not? And one of the Senator Jim Risch got Comey to admit that saying you hope something goes a certain way is not something you can be prosecuted. You can't be prosecuted for hoping for something.
Right.
The second one is asking for loyalty. We can go into that.
Right.
And the third one is the Russia probe. And he was just asked us before we started, did the president or anyone in the administration pressure you in any way to halt the Russia probe? And he said no. So I think these are the three core issues.
And just your brief summary there indicates it looks like Trump is not going to be worse off at the end of these hearings than he was before, even though I don't think they're going to let up. But I enjoyed reading, and I think you actually saw some of this on the internet, Alan Dershowitz's opinion.
Yeah.
This to me is fantastic because we've characterized him as being, irrational, left-wing ball that we couldn't talk to. But here he comes up and all of a sudden he sounds sensible on this issue. And he says the president has all the authority in the world. If he just, if he's in charge of the government and he has the authority to fire him and ask questions because he is the president. And his point is that if you can give somebody a pardon, that you are being very much involved. Then he points out where other presidents have given pardons because their friends were about to be tried. And I think it was Weinberger that Bush gave a pardon to. Nobody said boo. Yeah. Why did he give the pardon to? He didn't want them tried. He didn't want it out there. So ultimately, the president does have this. If somebody considers him doing something impeachable, then they get impeached. But they cannot take this away. And I think this is where Comey really comes up short on really understanding the process. And he's more or less been sucked into the Washington thing about becoming their own little dictators. And it's easy to become a dictator in the CIA and the FBI because nobody's allowed to know what's going on. And he's independent. Well, there's a pretty good argument that he's not. He should not be as independent as he believed he is, and therefore he's on the short end of this argument.
It looks like he's trying to recreate a J. Edgar Hoover kind of FBI where he doesn't respond to anyone. And you're the last person to be accused of being an apologist for more executive power. But this is one case where if the executive does not have authority over the Attorney General, the FBI, head of the FBI, then who does? They carve out a whole fiefdom. I think something complimenting what Dershowitz said, which was very well said, the Wall Street Journal had a good article about it. And they said essentially the same thing. You can't have a situation where you have someone like Comey who's not answerable to any elected official whatsoever. It seems like a dangerous thing, especially with that much power and secret power.
And I think it was that article that pointed out that if he was concerned about what Trump was saying, he could have, confronted him right then, or he could have consulted with somebody after higher up. Attorney General is what he should do, go up the ladder. But he decided he would keep this secret or private, but he didn't do anything. And it was suggested he could have also talked to the president's attorney, the attorney that represents him, and say, hey, look, they've gone too far. But talking about, executive power and how far they can go, I remember when we struggled on reining in the wars overseas that we wanted to deny funding and have resolution of disapproval and all these things, but we always guarded against saying that we're not directing the president to make some type of military maneuver because he was the commander-in-chief. And this is what's happening here in a domestic sense. The commander-in-chief is just they're eliminating him. But where is it? What if there was an attempt to do this and there was no media support, for it? Well, why was there not the outcry? With Comey, there was a little bit from Republicans, but the media just didn't pile on Comey because of how he protected Hillary when he was protecting Hillary. And I think her abuse of the law was much greater. But there was essentially nothing said. But that's part of who controls the message and who controls the media and who controls the foreign policy. And that, I think, is really what is behind the scenes here. And this is fluff, it's politics, but there's some real significance behind it, too.
Yeah, exactly, because it is a faction of the deep state. But here's if I can read a short quote from the Wall Street Journal article, because I think it captures it. Essentially, this is an issue of someone coming to Washington who doesn't know how it works. And here's a quick quote. This is what the Wall Street Journal said. At worst, Comey's account, the writing down, the memorialization of the meetings, Comey's account reveals a willful and naive narcissist who believes he can charm or subtly intimidate the FBI director. but who has no idea how Washington works. And that would reflect back on the asking for loyalty and these things, sort of trying to charm his way into it.
Yeah, and I think he's pretty much. I think Comey is pretty slick. I think he's good. I think he handles himself well. But when he's dissected out by people who know the law, and a person like Dershowitz can challenge him. But I think he's a good witness in this sense because he doesn't come across as a loudmouth braggart. And he can disarm people. But the bottom line, of course, is what is he really thinking and what is he really doing and what is he doing with power? And in this case, of course, he's trying to gain power, which the FBI directors have generally done, over the many years, all the way back to Hoover.
Yeah. And if you look at the written testimony, we were able to read it yesterday, we read it a few times. To be honest, it comes across as kind of whiny. Here's Comey, here's a guy in a very powerful position, spent his entire career in law enforcement, and he says, I don't want to ever be alone in the room with the president again. Yeah. And he's feeling so stunned. He's feeling, when he asked for loyalty, he felt so, why didn't he just tell the president, listen, Mr. President, you're new to Washington, you're asking me for loyalty. I don't know exactly what you're asking. If you're asking me to be an honest broker and do my job properly, then absolutely. If you're asking something else, let's be clear about this because you cannot do this. Why wouldn't he just say that? Why he ran off and wrote a little memo about it.
And I think what we're talking about is the process, the contest between Trump and Comey, the Republicans and the Democrats, and it's back and forth, and this is the process. But how did this all get started? It has to do with Flynn, and it has to do with Russiagate and the blaming of Flynn dealing with the Russians, and maybe he is vulnerable for this. But talking this whole idea, these back channels. The Republicans had a back channel. What happens at every administration? And just think of the back channels that our hero Ronald Reagan did. He had a lot of back channels and accomplished a whole lot. Well, and I'm not saying that in a positive sense because I didn't like exactly what was going on then. But but they're able to control the media. But the real issue is to tie Flynn and others into dealing with the Russians to undermine. The goal was to undermine the softer policy that Trump talked about in the campaign, and because they had to convert him into much closer position to NATO, switched on NATO, and to be more hostile toward Russia, and also being more hostile toward Assad. He was already not too enamored by the Iranians. So, and that's been accomplished. But I think, that is the real issue, and they've been able to, accomplish a lot by doing this.
Yeah, the goal obviously was to prevent any sort of rapprochement with the Russians. But here there was already a 6-month ongoing investigation about Russian involvement. Nothing came out of it. There was nothing there. All it was doing was undermining the new administration. Perhaps Comey should have been fired several months ago for pursuing this to no end.
Somebody who pursues things trying to stay consistent with a philosophy and a policy and not flip-flop. What I find the most annoying are the people who demagogue, and they're inconsistent. And this is why I get annoyed with our policies. And it's not the policy of Trump or even the Bushes and the Clintons. It's just the United States policy. And yes, so the saying in Washington, you do care if the Russians are interfering with our elections, don't you? Yeah, I care about it. And they may have. But I don't think they did anything. I don't think they had any more control over the workers' votes in Wisconsin and Michigan than the man in the moon, And even if and I hardly believe they'd waste their time on it, on what was happening. But I'm sure they talked to people and they knew what was coming on. They were probably very interested in knowing maybe we get an administration that is going to lighten up on some of these unfair sanctions that have been placed on us. So that goes on. But the hypocrisy for me is, what do we do? And I mention that so often in my campaigns about the hypocrisy of our foreign policy and blowback and this sort of thing. What would we think if they did to us what we do to them? But from 1946 up into the year 2000, we know, it's been documented, some pretty good analysts, 81 times we interfered in elections. But that's only the beginning. That's only up to the year 2000, and that doesn't mean coups, assassinations, and regime changes.
That doesn't count.
But if you go and gather that up, and you take it all the way up to current times, nobody has actually given the total, but I'm willing to put my estimate over 100 times we have been involved. You would think. Do you think, Daniel, we're going to see the day that we're going to have some serious hearings up in Washington and talk about, there's something wrong with our foreign policy? How can we construct this thing about Russia coming here and taking over our elections and controlling, and they got Trump elected, this sort of stuff? And we're going to analyze these 100 times that we have been involved, and maybe we have suffered from it, and maybe we're going to suffer a lot more from it. Is it morally right? Is it constitutionally authority? Is it really justified? And but you know what? I'm not holding my breath on this. But it would be nice if we had more people think in those terms, because our foreign policy would then be different, and we would be a little bit more attuned to diplomacy and trade and friendship.
Yeah, remember from WikiLeaks that great quote from Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. Yeah, we need to have elections for the Palestinians, but first we need to know who's going to win beforehand. That's the U.S. attitude in a nutshell.
And that was out in the open.
Yeah. But the Russia thing was handled badly by the Trump people. I think they were intimidated by the strength of these accusations, by the groundswell, by the media, and how it ganged up 100%. And I think that forced them probably to make some stupid decisions. Flynn trying to hide his discussions with Kislyak. The same thing with Sessions. Why did he recuse himself? As a senator, he met with a foreign ambassador. I bet he met with the ambassadors of many, many countries as a senator. Why all of a sudden did that cause him to recuse himself? So I think their fear of this caused them to do stupid things in secret that if they had just done them out in the open, we talked about it before the show, Trump could have had a press conference, maybe some businesses that lost, they had to fire Americans because they lost their trade deals with Russia, and say, I'm going to stop this right now. We're going to let Americans do business in Russia and have American jobs. If they had handled it that way, I think it would have been a very different outcome.
Why don't you close by just giving a brief summary of what you think might happen, because we're in the middle of the hearings right now in the Senate, and there's a lot of politics involved, and there is some foreign policy involved. What do you think might happen in the next few days?
I'm afraid nothing is going to change at all. I think the Democrats will take away from, or the anti-Trump people will take away from this hearing the message that they want, and the pro-Trump people will take away the message they want. I think we're going to stay in the quagmire.
Right. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. I'm interested in what's in it for the American people. And right now, they're very much entertained. I understand there's a lot of people watching hearings, and they think there's going to be fireworks, and they want to see fireworks, and the pro-Trump people want to see him win, and the Democrats want to see the opposition win. So it's a game they're playing. And yet I think beneath the surface, there's some very serious things going on, but this is pretty superficial. This is about politics. This is mostly about politics, dealing with a serious issue, and probably the least serious issue is we got to get to the bottom of it. What did the Russians do, and how were they able to get involved in our election? That's probably the least important thing. But I'll tell you what, the foreign policy of this country is involved in this, and that to me is very important. So hopefully this will motivate people to find out more about the foreign policy, but also ask questions about the FBI and the CIA. How can they be so secret? And all governments have these secret organizations. It seems like they're inherent. And even our government, which is supposed to be more open and more democratic, here we had a J.R. Hoover that used the FBI in a very vicious manner. So this is something that we should address as well, because quite frankly, there's no authority, direct authority in the Constitution for us to have an FBI as authoritarian, as big as it is, and same way with the CIA. So if we're interested in living in a free society and protecting personal liberty, we would really encourage people to think about and study about, the importance and the necessity of having an organization like the FBI, and pay attention to who the next guy is that's going to be running the FBI, and will he be any better than what we've had in the past. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.